Good evening everyone, and welcome to this short Psychology CPD topic video titled Energising Students in the Year 1 Psychology Classroom. This is now the fifth of our AQA webinars. The last one we delivered, which proved really popular on what the examiner said and how to respond in summer 2017, is now on YouTube, so feel free to watch that, where we analyse the results from this year's exams and look for places where we could improve next year and some exam technique. Today one, of course, we're looking at energising students in the Year 1 classroom and looking at some practical teaching hints and tips to really bring psychology to life. And on Sunday the 18th of September at 8 o'clock we have practical approaches for teaching issues and debates in Year 2, which I know is a really sort of hot topic this year and one that many people are speaking about, so that'd be a great one to attend. Just as a really quick reminder, we have two face-to-face CPD events coming up on Birmingham in the 23rd of September and in London on the 30th of September, and you can find full details of those on the Tutor2U website. So if you go tutor2u.net /events/teachers, or just email events@tutor2u.net or email me directly. And if you've liked these webinars with sort of 4 to 5 activities, these face-to-face days, we make no apologies for this, are really packed today with over 40 teaching and learning activities involved, and you get to try them out, meet the team and sort of discuss different active approaches to teaching. So if you like what we're doing today, you'll get much more of that on a face-to-face event. When I did my teacher training, I remember the very first thing my teacher trainer said, and he asked us if we agreed on it. He said there's no such thing as behaviour management, which back in the days as teacher trainees we all thought, what on earth is he talking about? He must be mad. And then he started to reveal why he said that. And he said that as long as a teacher is delivering consistently good lessons all of the time, and the students are enjoying their learning and loving their subject, then actually behaviour management is no longer in the equation. And that kind of really resonated with me, and is really sort of the starting point for this webinar, because I genuinely believe that an outstanding teacher isn't someone who can possibly deliver outstanding lessons all of the time. And I know my boss in my last school and I totally agreed that someone who's genuinely outstanding delivers good lessons all of the time, 90% of the time, but can then really throw in 1 or 2 of these outstanding lessons per half term that really sort of energises the students. And that's really what this webinar is about, those sort of lessons that you walk away from delighted that your students have learnt so much, and you feel delighted in your teaching, and it's just lifted everyone's mood up again. And that's the purpose really of today. It's important to note, because many people are not fully aware of this, that in terms of Ofsted grading, Ofsted don't actually grade individual teachers on individual lessons. So you should never have this fear that Ofsted are going to come in and grade you, because actually they simply don't do that. They're grading whole institutions. So just keep that in the back of your mind, that actually we should never really be graded on an Ofsted criteria in terms of good and outstanding anyway. Two main sort of aims for today's session. The first one I've titled Lessons That Can Create a Buzz, and I've picked out just 2 examples of lessons that I really look forward to in the teaching year, and things that never fail to sort of amuse me and amuse the students, and you know they leave having a really good time. And then the second half of the webinar, I want to look at lessons that can make research methods fun, where you can replicate an experiment, and we'll show you an example of an experiment by Dima Nyauman today. That's a really great one to replicate. And then a whole series of memory experiments that you can replicate in the classroom called Memory on the Move, which some of you may have encountered before. Really great activity. So let's make a start looking at these sort of 2 lessons I've just picked out in the approaches in psychology topic in Year 1 that can really create a buzz in the classroom, and one that students will enjoy. So if we look at this first one called Passing on Your Genes, it's an activity I sort of came up with last year, and you may have used something similar, but it's really, really good fun. And the idea of the activity, or the aim of the activity, is really just to have fun with biological explanations and evolutionary theory. In particular, the idea of mate selection. So this is certainly something you could use in the relationships topic in Year 2. And what you ask students to do is to select a mate during the lesson. But the way you do that is you provide them with a series of cards, because if you don't have an even number of male and female students, you need to assign them a gender. And you'll see 2 on the screen here. So I would print the cards off, and we'll provide you with these. Print the male ones off in blue, just so you can see who's meant to be male in the lesson, and print the female ones off on pink. It just makes the lesson much easier. And you give them these cards, and they have certain characteristics, certain traits behind them. So they've got the gender, they've got the person's hair colour, they've got something called build and attractiveness, and there'll be people that are strong and muscular, there'll be people that are skinny and not very muscular in the male cards. Then you've got level of intelligence, and that ranges from highly intelligent to not very intelligent. And then you've got the immune system, which is an important one to put on there, so whether they're prone to illness or not very prone to illness. And there's 24 of these cards, so if you've got a class of 24 it works perfectly, or 24 or more it works perfectly. If you've got a smaller class, just make sure you pick out a selection of these different cards. A really fun thing to do, just really for my own amusement, is if you've got one of those particularly arrogant male students, make sure you give them a card that's not particularly attractive with really poor qualities on it, because that always tends to annoy them a little bit. Now, the idea of the activity is once you've given these cards out, you ask the students to sort of stand up, wander around, and you give them 5 minutes to find their perfect mate. And it's really amusing to watch at this stage because the students simply wandering around the classroom, and you overhear these comments. Oh no, I'm not going to go out with you. You're not very attractive. You're not very intelligent. And they move on, and they very quickly pair up. Once they found their mate, you get them to sit down. Now, once the 5 minutes is up, at that point you stop, and anyone who's left over is still looking around. You take their card back off them, and you tell them that they've no longer survived evolution, and they should sit down because they weren't able to mate and pass their genes on, and they're now out of the activity. At that point, and this is where it becomes a bit more imaginative, you say that for our ancestors, thousands, millions of years ago, they probably wouldn't have survived as just two people. So they now need to form a tribe, and each pair of students needs to pair up with another pair. But of course they want a strong tribe. They want a tribe that is going to survive and look after one another's offspring and protect them. So they want to form the strongest tribe. And you can repeat this 2 or 3 times, because what you want to get is to a stage where you have 2 groups of 8, 2 distinct groups of 8 if possible. If you've got a smaller class, 2 groups of 4 would work perfectly fine. At that point, this is where you throw in the sort of the difficult bit. You say that only 6 of you can actually survive. So one tribe is going to lose 2 of its members, basically, and let's see which strongest tribe survives out of them. So you want to finish with 6 deliberately, and it works really, really nicely. Let them fight it out, so to speak, or maybe literally. And at that point, you end up with your 6 survivors of evolution, so to speak. And you want to work out who's left. The key point of this activity is plotting out the characteristics to see who's left at the end of this process. At this point, I would tend to literally just jot it up on a normal whiteboard. So I would quickly draw a table, male, female, their physique, their intelligence, their immune system, and get the survivors to just call out what their characteristics were. So just as an example, you might find that in the males, there were 2 strong muscular men that survived and someone with a moderate build. They were all highly intelligent, and 2 of them had a strong immune system. 1 had an average. And then females, you might end up with a similar pattern, sort of 3 highly attractive females, 2 highly intelligent, but 1 with moderate intelligence. And interestingly, 1 with a weak immune system sort of got their way through there. And this provides you with a great discussion point, because you can circle the sort of lesser characteristics, if we want to call them, so to speak, and ask the students to sort of say, well, hang on a minute, why is it that these ones made it through? What is it about these characteristics that actually survived? It becomes a really, really nice discussion point at this moment in time. Now, the way the activity's been designed deliberately, and I've put the table on the screen, you don't need to worry about this, but you can alter this if you want. I've provided you with this so that you can alter the cards, is that it's deliberately built that if you finish with 6, the 6 people can't all be highly attractive, highly intelligent, with brilliant immune systems. There's going to have to be some variations in the genes that survive. And it's always interesting, because in every class I've done this with, someone manages to get through based on their personality. There'll always be someone with a lot of charisma who's not very intelligent, with little muscle, but actually still manages to get into the final 6, or whatever the case may be. And that provides a really interesting discussion point. And you can change these, but the activity is perfectly designed that in the 6 there'll be some deliberate variation that gives you that discussion point to discuss evolution and how genes get passed on, etc. Now, following this, there's just some questions really for the students to consider, which then just form part of a wider sort of classroom debate. So you get them to consider things like, what physical characteristics do we look for in a mate and why? What psychological characteristics do we look for in a mate and why? Which physical and psychological traits actually died out for evolution? Quite an interesting thing to discuss. And then really this is where the sort of discussion gets going again. You sort of say, well, if we now think to sort of 2016, do we still base our preferences on these same physical and psychological characteristics? Are we still looking for males that are tall, muscular, etc.? And are we still looking for highly attractive females? And I leave the picture there just to get them talking with Catherine Zeta-Jones and Michael Douglas to say, well, surely she's not going out with him because of his physique and muscles. And likewise, the final question, which always gets the male students laughing, is that, well, if we're all looking for mates that have the optimum physical and psychological characteristics, then why don't males tend to mate with females that are bodybuilders, for example? Many males find it unattractive, as an example. And just really gets the discussion going. So a lovely sort of active lesson, but finishes with some really meaningful discussion around mate preferences, around sexual selection in particular, natural selection and evolution, and just a really lovely activity. So that's the first one for the biological approach. And the second activity, and one that never sort of ceases to amuse me, I've called it They Still Haven't Clocked On, and that will make more sense in a moment. It is a lesson based around the cognitive approach, and that was an area that was answered particularly poorly in this year's exam, and we'll talk about that in a moment. Now, the way this particular lesson works, and that's a picture of my old office, beautiful, I know, is that you send the students into your office or just another room, it doesn't matter what, to pick up a leaflet or a textbook or something. You want to sort of lay out some leaflets on a table. What I used for this particular one is I took a load of leaflets from our library for the different subject choices our college offered. And you ask the students to go in and pick up one of the leaflets. And at this point, you kind of want to play Derren Brown with them, and you say that you can predict with 100% accuracy what leaflet they're going to select because you're a psychologist. And on the next slide, for example, I'm going to tell every one of you which one you picked and why. What you then do is, once all the students are returned back to the classroom, in their groups, in their tables, you ask them to draw a diagram of your desk and the surrounding shelves in groups and give them 5 minutes. And there's always typically some art students that do a stunning job, beautiful jobs drawing these pictures. And you sort of leave the activity there. And once they've done them, you stick them up around the room and you get them to have a look at one another's drawings and sort of compare and see how accurate they were. Now, this is a larger picture of the office, and it's at this point you can actually, I tend to show them back a picture of the office or take them back in there if they don't believe you. And you ask them, well, was there anything unusual in the office? And still most of them won't say anything. And you point out at this point that it's interesting that you've asked them to sort of draw the office, yet none of them remembered the shampoo that was in the middle of the desk right in front of the leaflets. And none of them drew the frying pan that was sitting on the shelf right above their head where they were picking up the leaflets. And trust me, they will not believe they're there. Many will want to go back into the room and realise they're actually right in front of them. And I've done this lesson so many times. In some of them I made it really obvious. I even had the frying pan, the shampoo in the frying pan right on top of the leaflets, and they never ever notice. It's really, really a great activity to get the students doing. As a little extension, just in case you're not aware, it's actually based on a real experiment by Brewer and Trayans, who actually made participants sit in a waiting room and then asked them to recall what objects were in it. And most of them, because it was an office, tended to say there were things like books in there, there was filing cabinets and so forth, and they picked out things that you would expect to see in an office that weren't actually there, and tended to miss the things like the kettle that was sitting on the table and so forth. Now, that's the first part. It doesn't actually stop there. The beauty with this particular activity is you're going to carry on at this point. And you tell your students, say, look, you were terrible at that first activity, but I didn't tell you to look out for those things, so I take credit for that. So we're going to try a different activity. And this time, you're going to actually ask them to concentrate on the details of a picture. Now, I know many of you will have done this before, and it still works with students every year. You show them a picture. So you ask them to memorise, give them a minute or so, and you say, right, I want you to memorise this picture of a clock. Hence the title of the activity, they haven't clocked on yet. And you give them a minute, you say you want you to remember the exact details, and they'll really focus on the things like who made the clock, the date on it, the time on it, and that's perfect. At that point, you then ask them again, you give them a minute to sort of to draw the clock, or 3 minutes or so to draw the clock, it doesn't matter how long. And what I will do at this point is the minute a student gets this task wrong, I will take their page away from them and rip it up in front of them just to be cruel. And they're often confused and don't know why I'm doing it. And I normally say, well, I told you to pay attention and you haven't paid attention yet. For those of you that haven't spotted it yet and haven't seen, the purpose of this activity is designed around the number 4 on a Roman numeral clock. So typically on Roman numeral clocks, the 4 is represented by 4 ones rather than IV. Now, what happens is if you ask a student to draw it, typically they're going to draw IV because they don't actually pay attention to the Roman numerals. What they're doing is employing a schema, because it's part of the cognitive approach, and taking a shortcut, a mental shortcut, and actually just writing IV because they assume it's correct when it's not. And again, most students will typically get this activity wrong. So great activity for you to run following on from the office because you've asked them to pay attention and they still get it wrong. At this point, you want to sort of bring the activity to sort of together, and a hilarious way that you can sort of put this into everyday context, which relates to the examiner's commentary this year, is I usually say, right, I'm going to show you a picture on the screen, and I just want you to write in your groups on a mini whiteboard the first words that really come into your mind when you see this image. And if you've got a sort of very relaxed classroom with some outlandish boyish students, typically you show them this picture and they write all sorts of disgraceful comments on their whiteboards, which is always really, really amusing. At that point, you say, thanks very much for that. I'm going to tell my sister that you told her, you said all these things, and they're normally horrified at this point. But it's just to get them putting that idea and knowledge of schemas that they've sort of been looking at and thinking about all lesson into an everyday context. That the problem with an image like this, of course, is we see it and we make certain assumptions based upon the image, what the person's wearing, the child's expression on the face. Okay. Important. I'm just going to bring back an examiner commentary, a comment that I mentioned in one of our previous webinars, that actually what students will typically think from that last activity is that this is a problem with the cognitive approach because schemas lead to stereotypes and that's a bad thing. But actually what you need to get them to understand is that by having this knowledge that schemas actually cause us to stereotype is actually a positive thing because it allows us to deal with stereotyping in society. So just make sure you bring that in because it was in the examiner report this time round. So there you have it, two sort of really great lessons, ones I really look forward to every year in teaching. One for the biological approach, one for the sort of cognitive approach, that really do create a buzz in the classroom. The students tend to leave amazed that they didn't pick up on the things and they didn't work these concepts out for themselves, and it's really, really good fun. In terms of the second part of this webinar, wanted to look at lessons that make research methods fun and doing that through sort of replicating experiments. And there's two activities in this final part that I just want to show you. Now the first activity is a replication of an experiment by a researcher called Demon Yauman. And if you haven't heard of Demon Yauman, don't worry because it's a lovely, lovely task. And the purpose of this activity is you give your students a set of instructions. You tell them that scientists have recently discovered 3 new life forms that are settled here on planet Earth. And although we don't have pictures of these creatures, we've now got some basic facts about the 3 different creatures that have landed on Earth. And we need to memorise as much information as we can about them. Now the way to run this in the classroom, which is really good fun, is to run this as an independent measures experiment. So what you'll see on the next slide is you're going to give your students 7 or 8 facts about each of these different aliens. So there's an alien called the Pangarish, one called the Norgleti, and one called the Delenga. Each of them has some facts about them. But what you don't tell your students is that half of the room will receive this page on the left, which has the same information on it, but it's just in grey, really difficult to read from. And the other half of the class have this page that's in Arial size 16, nice and easy to read from. So you don't tell them that, you let them turn the page over and give them 90 seconds or so to memorise the different facts about the aliens. Follow that up with a very, very quick distractor task, something like ask them to count backwards in 3s from the number 47, whatever it is, just for a minute or so, just to distract them. And then at that point, you give them the 10 questions that test their knowledge about those alien species, different questions testing how well they've remembered those different facts. At that point, you'll show them the results. The results will come up on screen just to show them the different results, and they will check out which ones they got correct. And what you then want to do is collect the data from your class. So I would just ask my students in condition 1 who have the difficult to read font to read out their results, and the same for condition 2, those who have the easy to read font read out their results as well, how many they got. And then you can embed some maths at this point, get them to calculate the means, the ranges and so forth. And then you get them to compare their results with the results of what Demon Yauman actually found. Okay, and incidentally, what the results will tend to point towards is that the students who received the difficult to read font, that in grey really small, actually will always remember more words than those that received the easy to read font, because actually they spend more time thinking about it, processing it, and that causes them through levels of processing to remember it more. And then you've got some concluding questions just to bring all that together. The beauty with doing an experiment like this one is that there is so much scope to, of course, discuss where they used an independent measures design, why did they have to do that, and start to bring in so many research method concepts that just mean take this sort of everyday experiment and make it something much more meaningful to embed lots of different concepts within. So really, really lovely experiment. You can then, as a free article, actually, Demon Yauman is available free of charge. You can ask the students if they want to as a sort of extension activity. It's only a 5-page PDF article. They can go away and read the whole extract if they want, and it's quite an easy to read article, so it's a really lovely one to sort of suggest to your higher ability students to go away and read. And remember that in year 2 in particular, they need to understand the structure of a research report. So it's really good to get them reading some originals, because then they get to understand what goes into the abstract, what goes into the introduction, method and so forth. So it's not a bad idea to introduce them to full articles like these ones, because it just highlights some year 2 concepts. Last but not least is a final activity called Memory on the Move, which is the carousel of all carousel activities. It's a brilliant activity, but just again want to show you sort of how you can embed so many research method ideas and experiments into one single lesson quite seamlessly if it's well planned and well delivered. So the aim of this activity is really simple. It's to take part in 7 mini memory experiments and work out the connections between the key concepts of the multi-store model and the working memory model. Now what you'll have to do for this is arrange your tables. So you'll need 7 basically tables of testing stations. So you might want to do it in a circle, you might want to split your tables up, but you need 7 distinct tables. And each of those tables will then get a set of instructions, and we've designed those for you. So you've got a set of 7 different instructions that you leave on the table. Now the way to run this activity is you get one student, one different student, to sit at each of the tables who's going to become the experimenter. So one student will remain stationary on that table and will become the experimenter for activity 1, another for activity 2, and so forth. What you then do is with your other students, you get them to carousel round. So you give them 3 minutes each to sit at a table while the experimenter runs the experiment. And after 3 minutes, blow a whistle, and they have to move on to the next one. So in the first stage of the process, they're just actually running the experiment. After you've done that 7 times, you then ask the students that were the experimenters to swap places, so they can actually then take part in the experiment themselves, and you repeat it another 7 times. But everyone's moving around, so no one's going to get bored. Plenty for the students to be getting on with. Once you've done that, they then consider all of the questions in the final column on the handout, and these are related to really key concepts that they need to know for memory: sensory memory, capacity of short-term memory, the different components within the working memory model, episodic memory, procedural memory. So loads and loads of application of knowledge to the different memory concepts, but embedding key experiments as they go through. So Miller's magic number 7 is run as a proper experiment in that. So you can see, actually, rather than just trying to run one experiment in the lesson, the beauty with this is you're running 7 different ones, and you could easily run this as a year 1 activity, to actually teach it if you want, if you're short of time, or as a brilliant sort of revision activity in year 2 after you finish teaching all of the topics to sort of revise it. So there's many ways you can run that activity. And there we have it. So 2 just very different styles of activities. One where you replicate the full experiment, one where you replicate bits of 7 experiments. But just to show you how you can make sort of lessons with research methods actually quite enjoyable and quite fun, embedding loads of the key research methodology throughout. As always, all of these resources, all of the different activities and resources from today are going to be made available straight away after this webinar on our Psychology A-Level Facebook page. If you're not on Facebook, as always, they'll be sent out tomorrow morning as part of our daily digest. So you'll receive an email tomorrow morning with all of those activities embedded within it. And as always, please do spread the good work we're doing. So if you've enjoyed what you've seen today, please can you send a message out on Twitter just to make other psychology teachers aware of the resources that are out there for them, because we want as many people as possible sort of enjoying, engaging with these resources and making the most of them. Any questions, as always, feel free to sort of ask through the Facebook channel or drop me an email directly. Thank you very much. Have a good evening.